Let's have a look at late flowering lust. A good starting point is always to look at the title. The term late flowering. Flowering brings to mind the idea of blossoming. A flower is something beautiful, and I guess flowering and blossoming is often an image that's associated with love and also with youth. So if it's late flowering, then it implies sort of aging, and of course this is lust, not love, which is important. So in this poem we've got an older male persona. Interesting to note that Betjeman was under 50 at the time of writing this poem, and what he's doing in this poem is that he's mocking the sexual desires of an ageing man, pretty much like Senex, and this is why as a department we decided to do the two, Senex and late flowering lust, together in one lesson. I guess sort of lustfulness and bawdiness are depicted in a comically grim way, a comically macabre way. And what Betjeman does in this poem is he distorts the reality of their embrace through comic exaggeration. You've got this image, which we'll look at closely in a minute, which is kind of grotesque, but also quite funny. And it's Betjeman's, the way Betjeman perhaps views himself in that particular moment. So let's have a closer look at the first verse. My head is bald, my breath is bad, unshaven is my chin. I have not now the joys I had when I was young in sin. So he's exaggerating for the sake of comedy. You know, he's pointing out his faults. You know, his hair, lack of hair, his bad breath, and his in fact he hasn't shaven. And it you know, it kind of really sets the scene. I guess that this makes him feel sad, but what he's doing here as well with this is that he's making fun of himself, he's mocking himself. It's very self-deprecatory. Second verse, I run my fingers down your dress with brandy certain aim. He's been drinking, and he finds his own kind of drunken fumbling amusing. Brandy certain aim is obviously not particularly certain, maybe, with where his hands are going. And you respond to my caress and maybe feel the same. So it's doubt really as to whether these feelings are reciprocated. But I have a picture of my own on this reunion night, wherein two skeletons are shown to hold each other tight. So this is where he's getting to this central image in the poem. In his imagination, Betjeman sees the humour in this scene, that on this reunion night, I don't know whether it's a party or whether these people, these two people are getting together. We don't know who it is. And they're getting together, and he sees the sort of irony in the situation. He kind of flashes. So the third verse, he gets to the central image of the poem. But I have a picture of my own on this reunion night, wherein two skeletons are shown to hold each other tight. So the image is a flash forward in time. It's another word for flash forward is prolepsis. So it's this ironic comic prolepsis, a comic flash forward into the future where he sees himself and his partner as skeletons locked in an embrace. And it's both tinged with sadness and with humour. The next verse: dark sockets look on emptiness, which once was loving-eyed. The mouth that opens for a kiss has got no tongue inside. So I've kind of boxed the words here that relate to his feeling of the feelings associated with old age: skeletons, emptiness, no tongue inside. It's a comically disturbing image of withering, deterioration, and the connotations of those words, of that that lexical field, are very negative. I cling to you, inflamed with fear, as now you cling to me. I feel how frail you are, my dear, and wonder what will be. So he's moving now to a much more serious tone of desperation and frailty of their bodies. And this repetition of the word cling serves to exaggerate that feeling of desperation, of trying to, I guess, cling to their youths as well. Moving on to the penultimate verse. There we go. Moving on to the penultimate verse. It gets much more serious. A week or 20 years remain, and then what kind of death? A losing fight with frightful pain, perhaps reminiscent of cancer, or a gasping fight for breath. Reminds us perhaps of a heart attack. So these rhetorical questions help to emphasise the uncertainty of their futures. How long will their lives last? Whether it's his or hers or their lives together. And then the final verse: too long we let our bodies cling. Again, that word there repeated. We cannot hide disgust at all the thoughts that in us spring from this late flowering lust. So rather like the previous poem that we studied, Senex, we've got those sort of mingled feelings of attraction and repulsion, of disgust and longing. So there's those two sort of contradictory feelings. So what are the comic devices that Betjeman uses in this poem? Well, certainly there's a degree of bawdy humour, isn't there? Of the kind of drunken fumbling of these two people. And also I think there's a self-deprecation there. There's kind of his mockery of himself, which creates much of the comedy of this poem as well. And the exaggeration of the exaggeration of that rather comically disturbing image of these withering skeletons. Use of irony as well, and perhaps black comedy, that kind of slightly macabre, kind of grotesque image that is a strange combination of comedy and seriousness, underlying seriousness. So there's black comedy there. So I guess one of the things to consider is, how comic is this poem? Is it too macabre to be considered comic? And that's something that you need to make your minds up. But it's certainly a very, very powerful poem.